Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is further. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear further used is to mean to help the progress or development of something. A second way you might hear it used is to mean to promote, right? So, with both of these definitions, you might think of kind of a picture in your mind of someone pushing something forward, right? And you're going to see lots of examples in a few moments of how we might use this in a sentence, but that's kind of that idea of progress or development, moving something forward. You should know that further is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all we need to do is add ing to form furthering. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are going to be made by adding ed. Our base verb, further, ends in a voiced R sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. We're not adding an extra syllable as we say it. So it should sound like this: furthered, furthered. Okay. Now, you'll be happy to know we don't have any additional phrasal verbs to study or practice. So that's going to allow us to focus on making some different sentences in the simple past tense and the present perfect progressive with our verb of the day. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was completed at some known point in the past. And the nice thing about this verb tense is that our structure is going to be the same no matter what our subject is. Okay, so whether it's singular, it's plural, it's I, it's you, right? Doesn't matter. What we're going to use in the affirmative is that ed ending. You can see that in the example. The base hit by the catcher furthered the team's lead, right? So again, we might think promote, progress, right? So maybe the team was up 3-1. This person gets a hit. Now it's 4-1, right? So it's furthered the lead. Now, if we want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, our structure is going to be did not and then the base verb. So notice we're not using the ed form here. You can see that in the example. That character's storyline didn't further the movie's plot in any way. I've seen sentences like this before, sort of analyzing movies. You might see something like that in a description reviewing theater work as well, or TV shows. But again, this goes back to that idea of sort of developing. Okay, and you'll notice in our example sentence here, did not has been combined into the contraction didn't. Still has the same meaning. Just many times we like to use those contractions to be a little faster as we're speaking. Now let's look at making a yes or no question. To do this, we're going to start with did, then we're going to have our subject, then the base verb. So again, in the negative and the yes or no question, we're not using the ed form of the verb. We only do that in the affirmative. Here's another example. Did she further her education after high school? Right? So, did she go to some additional training, community college, a 4-year college? Right? Those would all be examples of developing or continuing to progress and promote. Now, let's take a look at the present perfect progressive. You might hear this called the present perfect continuous, means the same thing. I like using the 3 P's here to remind me that I need 3 parts to make this verb tense in the affirmative. So my first part is going to be have or has, depending on what my subject is. So I do need to pay attention to the subject here. Then I'm going to use the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then I'm going to use the ing form of the verb. Here's an example. The company has been furthering the use of virtual reality in employee training courses, right? So this might go back to that idea of promoting. Okay, our second definition. Now, if I want to make a negative present perfect progressive sentence, I'm going to insert not after has or have. You might hear the contractions hasn't or haven't. An example of this: he hasn't been furthering his career during the pandemic, right? A lot of people just trying to survive, right? So not thinking about how can I grow, how can I develop, right? And I should note we're using this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present here. Finally, we can make yes or no questions in the present perfect progressive. Our structure here is going to be to start with have or has, whichever form matches our subject, and the subject comes next. Then we're going to use the participle been and then the ing form of the verb. You can see that in this example. Have the new employees been furthering the organization's mission? This might go again to that idea of promoting, right? Sharing it with others, keeping it in mind as they do their work, do their service. Okay. Now, let's take a moment to look at some related words and phrases. And the first word we're going to start with should look very familiar, right? It's got the exact same spelling and it's got the exact same pronunciation. The word further can be used as an adverb. And when it gets used in an adverb, one way you might hear it is in the comparative form. Okay, so if it might have been a while since you've studied this before, but with our adjectives and adverbs, we generally have three forms, right? So describing an action here, describing another adjective, then in comparing two things, right? So that's what I mean by comparative here. And then superlative, right? So you might remember that as the most or the least, okay? So in the comparative form, we are describing something that is at, to, or by a greater distance. Let me show you an example of that. When I was younger, I was always making plans to move further from my parents. Okay? This is something a lot of young people kind of have this idea of like, "Ah, I want to get out and live somewhere else, be in a different place, see a different part of the world, right? So I, I want to be a greater distance from them. A second way you might hear the adverb further used is to mean to a greater degree or a greater extent. So, an example here: he was frustrated further when the customer service agent hung up. So, maybe this is an experience we can all kind of understand. We're on the phone trying to work through some problem. It's not getting resolved quickly, right? And you can feel kind of a little frustrated. And then the person hangs up, right? So now the frustration is to a greater degree. A third way to use the adverb further is to mean in addition. And I'll point out the word furthermore would also have a similar meaning. So we could use either of these words in my next example sentence. I could say, further, the friendly atmosphere makes dining here a great experience. Right? So maybe I'm talking about a restaurant. I just told you how great the food is, and now I'm saying in addition. Right? I could also say, furthermore, the friendly atmosphere makes the dining here a great experience. They're going to have the same meaning. Now, the next word we're going to discuss is the adjective form of this word. So again, same spelling, same pronunciation. One way the adjective further gets used is again in the comparative form. So kind of our base adjective here would be far, F-A-R. And the comparative form, you might have studied this before, could be farther or further. Sometimes, and in certain forms of English, you'll hear them used in the same way. I think we tend, in the US, tend to use farther to talk about a physical distance, right? Like something we can measure. And we tend to use further, F-U-R here, to sort of describe maybe more of a relationship. So here my definition is more distance in space than something else. So an example here, the plaque is being mounted on the further side of the building from the river. right? So again, this idea of comparison. Okay. A second way to use the adjective further is just to mean going or extending beyond something else. So, an example here, do you have plans for further education, right? Beyond whatever you're doing right now, right? So, if you're in a college program, are you thinking about a master's or some advanced type of degree? The last thing we're going to talk about today is the phrase until further notice. You might have seen this on signs or seen it in other notes, but really what it means is someone is trying to indicate that a particular situation is not going to change until there's another announcement. So, an example of this might be the pool is closed until further notice, right? So, that kind of idea of in addition until a second announcement, until we tell you it's open. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.